She had nowhere to go. The rancher whispered, "Stay with me." Sarah's hands were frozen, her coat thin against the biting wind, and she hugged herself tightly as she walked along the empty road. The sky was painted in shades of gray, heavy clouds threatening snow, and the mountains in the distance looked cold and unwelcoming. She had been on the move for days, moving from one town to another, carrying nothing but a small, worn-out bag with her most essential belongings. Each town had offered only closed doors and empty stairs. No one seemed willing to give her even a night's rest. Sarah had learned long ago not to expect much from the world, but the emptiness she felt now was unlike anything she had ever experienced. Her journey had not been planned. One moment she had been living a life that seemed normal, or at least safe, and the next, everything had crumbled. She had left behind a past filled with painful memories, a place where she no longer belonged, and people who could not be trusted. Each step she took now felt heavy, burdened by fear and uncertainty. The little money she had saved was almost gone, and the thought of spending the night on a park bench or in a roadside diner made her stomach churn with dread. She needed somewhere to stay, somewhere she could feel at least a little safe. As she trudged through the thin snow covering the road, her mind wandered. She thought about her childhood, the small town she had grown up in, the smell of fresh bread from her mother's kitchen, the laughter of friends she had lost contact with, and the warmth of a home that had once felt safe. Those memories were bittersweet. She longed for a place where she could rest without fear, yet she knew returning to what she had left behind was impossible. Every step forward felt like walking through an endless winter, cold not just in the air, but in her heart as well. The wind picked up, whipping her hair into her face and biting at her cheeks. Sarah stopped for a moment, taking shelter behind a wooden signpost. Her legs shook from the cold, and tears of frustration blurred her vision. She had nowhere to go, no one to call, no home to return to. All she had was the road ahead, long and uncertain. She pulled her scarf tighter around her neck, pressing herself against the wooden post, trying to find a moment of warmth, any comfort, in the frozen air. Hours passed, though she could not tell for sure. The world around her was silent except for the howling wind and the occasional distant call of a bird. Her feet were sore, her bag rubbing painfully against her shoulder, but she kept moving. She knew she could not stop. Stopping meant freezing. Stopping meant vulnerability. Moving at least gave her a sense of purpose, even if it was only to survive another day. Just when her hope felt as thin as the clouds above, a truck appeared on the road ahead. Its headlights cut through the gray twilight, and the sound of its engine seemed almost like a promise of rescue. Sarah instinctively stepped back from the road, uncertain whether to wave or hide. The truck slowed as it approached, and the door opened. A man stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a worn hat and a heavy coat. His eyes were kind, with a calmness that seemed unusual in a stranger. "Are you okay?" the man asked, his voice gentle but firm. Sarah hesitated. She had learned to be cautious with strangers. I'm just trying to get somewhere," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The man nodded. "You look like you could use some help. There's a ranch not far from here. You can rest, get something to eat. It's not much, but it's warm." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She wanted to trust him, but years of disappointment and fear told her to be careful. Still, the warmth she imagined, a roof over her head and a bed to sleep in, was irresistible. She nodded slowly. I don't have anywhere to go," she admitted. The man gave her a small, understanding smile. "That's okay. Come with me. My name's Luke. You'll be safe at the ranch." She followed him, hesitant but relieved. As they walked to the truck, Luke opened the passenger door for her. She climbed in, grateful for the warmth of the heater. The engine roared to life, and the truck began its journey along the winding road toward the ranch. Sarah stared out of the window, watching the scenery blur past. Trees coated with frost, fields that stretched endlessly, and mountains rising majestically in the distance. She had never been this far from the city she knew, But the quiet beauty of the landscape filled her with a strange sense of calm she had not felt in a long time. The drive was long, but Luke kept the conversation light, asking her small questions about herself, where she was from, and what had brought her here. Sarah answered cautiously, offering only what felt safe, but she found herself talking more than she had intended. His presence was comforting, steady, like the ground beneath her feet after years of walking on uneven paths. Finally, the truck turned onto a gravel path, and the ranch appeared before her eyes. It was simple and rustic, a house with wooden siding and a porch that wrapped around the front. Horses grazed in the nearby field, and the warm light of the house spilled into the fading daylight. Sarah felt a flutter of hope in her chest she had almost forgotten existed. "This is it," Luke said, stopping the truck. "Welcome to the ranch. You'll be safe here for as long as you need." Sarah stepped out, her legs trembling not from cold but from the mixture of relief and disbelief. She had expected doors to close on her, strangers to turn away, and yet here she was, offered a place to stay, someone willing to help her without judgment. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to breathe. Luke led her inside. The house smelled of wood, hay, and something homey she could not quite name. A fire crackled in the hearth, sending warmth into every corner of the room. Luke handed her a blanket. "Sit here for a bit," he said. "I'll get you something to eat." Sarah sank into a chair near the fire, letting the heat seep into her frozen bones. She looked around, taking in the simplicity of the home, the worn furniture, the shelves lined with books and jars of preserves, and the quiet hum of a radio in the background. It was nothing like the places she had stayed in before. There was no harshness here, no impatience, no cold stares, just warmth and quiet understanding. As she ate the simple meal Luke prepared, Sarah found herself talking more than she had planned. She spoke of her journey, the fear that had driven her from town to town, the exhaustion she felt from carrying the weight of her past. Luke listened quietly, nodding occasionally, offering words of comfort without prying too deeply. It was a conversation unlike any she had had in years, one without judgment, only presence. After the meal, Luke showed her to a small room with a bed, clean sheets, and a window that looked out over the fields. "You can stay here tonight," he said softly. "No rush, no pressure, just rest." Sarah sank onto the bed, feeling the tension in her body begin to melt. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. She had nowhere to go, but for the first time it felt like she had found a place that could be home, at least for now. As she drifted off to sleep, the wind howled outside, but inside the ranch, there was only warmth. For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt safe. And though she did not know what tomorrow would bring, she knew that, at least for tonight, she was not alone. The next morning, Sarah awoke to the soft glow of sunlight streaming through the small window of her room. She rubbed her eyes, feeling the comfort of the bed beneath her and the warmth of the room. For the first time in weeks, she did not wake with a knot of anxiety in her stomach. The world outside still held uncertainty, but inside the ranch, there was calm. Slowly, she got out of bed and looked around, taking in the little details that made the place feel homey. The wooden floors creaked softly as she stepped across the room, and she noticed a small shelf filled with books and trinkets. Somehow, in the quiet simplicity of the room, she felt a sense of belonging she had not experienced in a long time. When she descended the stairs, the smell of fresh bread filled the air. Luke was in the kitchen, quietly preparing breakfast. The soft clatter of dishes and the sound of the sizzling pan were comforting, ordinary sounds that made the house feel alive. He looked up and smiled at her. "Good morning," he said. "Sleep well?" Sarah nodded, feeling slightly embarrassed at how natural it felt to speak to him.
"Yes."
"Thank you," she replied softly. Luke handed her a plate of warm bread with jam and a cup of steaming tea. "You need something to start the day," he said gently. "Then we can get started with some chores around the ranch." Sarah hesitated. Chores. She had never done work like this before. Her life had been filled with office buildings, busy streets, and the constant hum of city life. Horses, fields, and farm tools were foreign to her. But she could see the kindness in Luke's eyes, the patience in the way he moved, and she felt a spark of trust. I'll try, she said. After breakfast, Luke led her outside. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the faint scent of earth and grass. The ranch stretched over rolling hills, with fields dotted with grazing horses and a barn that stood like a quiet sentinel at the edge of the property. Luke handed Sarah a pair of gloves. "First, we'll feed the animals," he said. "It's simple work, but it helps you get used to the routine." Sarah took the bucket of feed in her hands, feeling the weight of it. She watched as Luke moved confidently among the animals, feeding them with care and speaking to them softly. The horses, large and graceful, nuzzled his hand without hesitation. Sarah felt a mixture of awe and nervousness as she approached them. She had never been so close to such animals before. Luke noticed her hesitation. "They're gentle," he said reassuringly. "Just take it slow." Sarah nodded and stepped forward, holding out the feed. A brown horse lowered its head and sniffed the bucket, then began to eat. Relief and a small thrill of accomplishment washed over her. She smiled, and Luke's approving nod made her feel proud. The morning passed in a steady rhythm. She swept the barn, refilled water troughs, and helped mend a fence that had broken in the recent storm. At first her movements were clumsy, but with Luke's guidance she began to feel more confident. He never criticized her mistakes. Instead, he offered gentle corrections and encouragement. With every small task completed, Sarah felt a sense of purpose she had not known in a long time. By midday, the sun had climbed higher, warming the air slightly. They sat on the porch, taking a short break. Luke handed her a bottle of water. "You're doing well," he said. "Most people find the work harder than it looks." Sarah looked at him, unsure how to respond. Compliments felt foreign, and she wasn't used to being praised. It's not so bad," she said, trying to sound casual. Luke chuckled softly. "It's okay. You don't have to pretend. I can tell when someone's being honest with me." There was a quiet moment, where the wind whispered through the trees and a few birds sang from the nearby fields. Sarah realized how rare this silence was for her, and how peaceful it felt. She felt herself relax, her shoulders loosening for the first time in weeks. Luke's presence was steady, calming, like a solid rock she could lean on without fear. As the days passed, Sarah settled into a rhythm. She woke early with the sun, helped with the animals, repaired fences, and learned small tasks around the ranch. Each day she felt stronger, more capable, and less burdened by the weight of her past. Luke remained patient, guiding her without overwhelming her. He never pushed, never questioned her limits. He simply offered his knowledge and experience. One afternoon, as they repaired a fence near the edge of the property, Sarah accidentally dropped a hammer. It clanged loudly against a post, startling both of them. Luke laughed softly. "Careful there," he said. "But it's okay. Everyone makes mistakes."
Sarah laughed nervously, feeling embarrassed. "I'm not very good at this," she admitted.
Luke shook his head with a smile. "You're learning. That's what matters. Nobody starts perfect. I've been doing this for years, and I still make mistakes sometimes." There was something comforting in his words, a reminder that perfection was not expected. Sarah began to feel a little pride in her progress, a sense that she was capable of more than she had thought. As the weeks went by, Sarah also began to open up emotionally. She found herself sharing bits of her life with Luke, not everything, but enough to feel connected. She spoke of her childhood in a small town, her love of books, and the dreams she had once held before her life had taken a dark turn. Luke listened quietly, never interrupting, never judging. His patience allowed her to speak freely, and with each story a little more of her fear melted away. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of pink and orange, Luke suggested they sit on the porch and watch the horses graze. They shared a quiet dinner on the porch, simple food, but somehow it felt more satisfying than any meal she had had in months. The warmth of the fire inside, the soft hum of the world around them, and Luke's quiet presence made her feel safe, something she had not felt in years. "You're stronger than you think," Luke said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence. Sarah looked at him, surprised by the depth in his voice.
I don't feel strong," she admitted. Luke smiled gently.
Strength isn't about never being afraid. It's about moving forward, even when you are. And you're doing that every day. For the first time, Sarah felt a small spark of confidence. Perhaps she could survive. Perhaps she could rebuild. And maybe, just maybe, she could begin to trust someone again. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah found herself not only learning the work of the ranch, but also learning about herself. She discovered patience she hadn't known she possessed, resilience she had forgotten, and a quiet joy in simple routines. She laughed more often, smiled more freely, and even began to plan small things for the future, like planting flowers near the porch or organizing the small library of books Luke kept. Luke noticed the changes too. He admired her determination, her quiet courage, and the way she approached new challenges with care and effort. He never pressured her, but he began to treat her as more than just a guest, more like family, someone he trusted and valued. One snowy morning, while they were feeding the animals, Sarah paused to watch a foal take its first unsteady steps. She felt a swell of emotion, a mixture of awe and hope. "They're so brave," she whispered. Luke glanced at her, a soft smile on his face. "Brave like you," he said quietly. Sarah felt her cheeks warm, and for the first time she allowed herself to believe in a little bit of hope. Maybe life could be kind again. Maybe there were people in the world who would not take advantage of her or hurt her. Maybe there were places where she could feel safe, where she could belong. By the end of the second month, the bond between Sarah and Luke had grown stronger. They shared quiet conversations on the porch, worked side by side in the fields, and spent evenings by the fire talking about dreams, fears, and simple joys. Trust, once fragile and fragile, was beginning to take root. Sarah had nowhere to go when she arrived at the ranch, but now, with each passing day, she began to feel like she had a place. Not just a place to sleep, but a place where she could heal, grow, and maybe, in time, feel truly at home. And as she watched the sun set over the fields, the horses grazing peacefully in the distance, she allowed herself to imagine a future where fear was not the center of her life. A future where hope, kindness, and trust could bloom once again. Sarah had begun to feel at home on the ranch. She woke with the sun, fed the animals, and worked alongside Luke with growing confidence. Life had a rhythm here, a steady pace that made the world seem a little less harsh. Yet despite the calm, a small shadow of worry lingered at the edge of her thoughts. She had left her past behind, but the past had a way of finding people who tried to escape it. It was a crisp morning when the first hint of trouble appeared. Sarah was in the barn, brushing the horses, when she heard the distant rumble of an approaching vehicle. It was unusual for anyone to drive down the gravel road that led to the ranch unannounced.
She glanced up, her heart tightening.
Luke noticed her pause. "Everything okay?" he asked, stepping closer. Sarah shook her head slightly. I don't know. "Someone's coming," she said quietly. Luke's expression remained calm, but his eyes narrowed as he scanned the road. "Oh. Stay here, I'll check," he said, moving toward the door with quiet assurance. From the barn window, Sarah watched as a car pulled onto the property. The car slowed near the barn, and a man got out. He looked familiar, though she could not place him immediately. Her stomach churned with unease. There was something in his eyes. A recognition, a curiosity, that made her blood run cold. Luke returned to the barn quickly. "Do you know him?" he asked. Sarah hesitated, then nodded slowly. He's from my past."
"I didn't expect to see him here." Luke placed a steady hand on her shoulder.
"We'll handle this. You don't need to face it alone." The man approached the barn cautiously. Luke stepped forward, standing between Sarah and the stranger. "Can I help you?" he asked politely, but firmly. The man's gaze shifted to Sarah. "I was just looking for someone," he said, his tone casual but probing. Sarah's heart pounded. She had hoped never to see him again. Memories she had worked so hard to leave behind surged to the surface. Fear, uncertainty, the feeling of being trapped. She wanted to run, but Luke's presence gave her a strange sense of calm. He did not panic. He did not act aggressively, but he was ready to protect her, if needed. Luke's voice was steady. "She's not going anywhere with you. If you have business, you can handle it somewhere else." The man hesitated, sizing Luke up. Sarah could see the calculation in his eyes, the sudden awareness that he could not intimidate them easily. Slowly, he nodded.
All right, I'll leave.
"For now," he muttered, turning back to his car. Once he drove away, Sarah sank to the ground, trembling. Luke knelt beside her, his hand resting lightly on her arm. "It's okay. You're safe," he said softly. Tears welled in her eyes, and she buried her face in her hands. I thought I could leave it all behind. I thought it was gone," she whispered. Luke remained silent for a moment, letting her speak. Then he said gently, "The past doesn't always disappear, but it doesn't have to control you. You've taken steps to protect yourself, and you're not alone anymore. You have me." Sarah lifted her head, meeting his calm gaze. For the first time, she felt a sliver of hope in the midst of her fear. She realized that while she could not change the past, she could choose who she trusted now. And Luke had proven himself reliable, steady, and kind. Over the next few days, the tension remained. Sarah found herself glancing toward the road more often, watching for signs of the man's return. Luke, sensing her unease, suggested small routines to help her feel secure. They checked the locks on the barn, ensured the animals were safely enclosed, and even built a small fence along the edge of the property to make it harder for anyone to approach unnoticed. Despite the precautions, Sarah struggled with fear. Every creak of the house, every rustle outside, made her heart race. One evening, she confessed to Luke that she was afraid of the world outside, afraid of what might come for her. Luke listened quietly, nodding. "Fear is natural," he said. "But living in fear isn't living at all. You face so much already, and you're still here. That shows strength. You're stronger than you know." Sarah wanted to believe him, but it was difficult. The past had taught her to be cautious, to keep her guard up. Yet, she began to notice something different about Luke. He never judged her, never pushed her beyond what she could handle, and always offered support without demanding anything in return. Slowly, she began to trust him, not just as someone who could protect her, but as someone who genuinely cared. One snowy afternoon, while they were feeding the horses, Sarah spoke of a dream she had long abandoned. "I used to want to travel," she said quietly, tossing hay to a foal. "See new places, meet new people. I thought it was impossible for me now." "Why impossible?" Sarah shrugged, her eyes on the horse. Because I've been running for so long, I don't think I could ever feel safe enough to try something new." Luke nodded slowly. "You've survived a lot already. Maybe it's time to think about what you want, instead of just surviving. Safety is important, but so is living." His words lingered in her mind as they continued their work. For the first time, Sarah allowed herself to imagine a future beyond just escaping fear. Maybe she could rebuild her life here, slowly, carefully, and maybe, eventually, even embrace the idea of new opportunities. As winter deepened, the days grew shorter and the nights colder. One evening, a heavy snowstorm hit, covering the fields and roads in a thick blanket of white. The wind howled through the trees, rattling the windows and making the ranch feel both isolated and protective. Sarah was nervous. The storm reminded her of how fragile life could be, how easily things could go wrong. Luke, however, remained calm. "We'll be fine," he said as he checked the animals. "Storms are part of life here. The key is to prepare and stay together." They worked side by side through the storm, securing the barn, checking on the horses and making sure everything was safe. Despite the blizzard, Sarah felt a strange sense of peace. She realized that life was unpredictable, but with someone she trusted by her side, she could face the challenges that came her way. That night, as the snow fell softly outside, they sat by the fire. The storm raged on, but inside, the warmth and light created a safe haven. Sarah found herself opening up more, sharing memories and small fears she had never spoken aloud. Luke listened patiently, never interrupting, offering words of reassurance when needed. "You've come a long way," he said quietly. "From the first day you arrived, scared and uncertain, to now, you're stronger, braver, and more resilient. I'm proud of you." Sarah felt her cheeks flush, not from embarrassment but from a growing sense of accomplishment. She had survived, adapted, and even begun to trust again. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time she felt capable of facing it. As the snowstorm ended, the world outside transformed. The ranch was covered in white, sparkling in the morning light. Sarah stepped outside, taking in the beauty and the silence. The fear she had felt for so long was still there, but it had lost some of its power. She was learning that safety, trust, and courage were not things she had to face alone. Luke joined her on the porch, handing her a warm cup of tea. "Look at this," he said softly, gesturing to the fields blanketed in snow. "Even after a storm, there's beauty. Even after fear, there's hope."
Sarah smiled, sipping the tea.
"You're right," she said quietly. I think I can start believing that again." Luke nodded. "And I'll be here with you every step of the way." In that moment, Sarah realized how much had changed since she first arrived. She had come to the ranch with nothing but fear and exhaustion, but now she had a place to belong, someone she could trust, and a growing belief in her own strength. The world outside might still hold dangers, but for the first time she felt ready to face them. Not alone, but with someone who had proven to care deeply and unconditionally. And though the shadow of her past would always linger, it no longer controlled her. She was learning to live in the present, to trust herself and those around her, and to find hope even when the future seemed uncertain. Spring arrived at the ranch with a quiet, gentle touch. The snow had melted, leaving the fields green and fresh, and small buds began to appear on the trees. Birds returned with their songs, and the horses grazed contentedly in the warm sunlight. Sarah stood on the porch taking in the scene. The air smelled sweet with new growth, and for the first time in a long while she felt a deep sense of calm settle into her chest. The past, the fear, the endless running, those things were still a part of her, but they no longer defined her. She had found a place where she could breathe, where she could heal. Luke stepped out beside her, carrying a basket filled with fresh eggs. He handed it to her with a smile. "Looks like we'll have a good breakfast today," he said lightly. Sarah smiled back, feeling warmth spread through her body. "I think I could get used to this," she replied. Luke chuckled. "I hope so. It's not always easy work, but it has its rewards." For months, Sarah had worked alongside him, learning not just how to care for the animals and maintain the ranch, but also how to care for herself. She had discovered patience, resilience, and quiet strength she didn't know she possessed. She no longer jumped at every sound outside or worried constantly about what might happen next. She had learned to trust Luke, to trust the safety he provided, and most importantly, to trust herself. That morning they worked together in the fields, repairing fences and planting a small vegetable garden. Luke showed her how to till the soil, how to plant seeds carefully, and how to water them so they could grow strong. Sarah found herself smiling as she worked, enjoying the simplicity and satisfaction of creating something that would thrive. "You know," Luke said quietly, "life is a lot like this garden. You put in effort, care, and patience, and eventually something beautiful grows." Sarah nodded, looking at the rows of tiny sprouts in the soft soil. "I think I'm starting to understand that," she said. As the day went on, they shared quiet conversation and laughter. The bond between them had grown deep over the months, built on trust, kindness, and shared effort. They no longer needed to explain every feeling or every thought. There was an understanding between them, a comfortable rhythm of companionship that did not rely on words alone. That evening, after the work was done, they sat on the porch with warm tea, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky blazed with colors, reds, oranges, and purples blending together in a stunning display. Sarah felt a profound sense of peace. For so long, her life had been filled with fear, uncertainty, and running. Now, she had a place to belong, someone to rely on, and a sense of hope she hadn't felt in years. "Luke," she said softly, breaking the comfortable silence, "I never thought I'd feel this safe. Not just physically, but inside. I feel like I can finally breathe."
Luke turned to her, his eyes gentle. "That's because you're not just surviving anymore.
"You're living, and you deserve it, Sarah. You've worked so hard to get here, and I'm proud of you." Sarah felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, gratitude, and a quiet joy she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. She realized that she had been running for so long, not just from the past, but from the possibility of happiness, trust, and peace. Now she could allow herself to embrace those things. Days passed, and the small challenges of ranch life continued to keep her engaged. Animals needed care, fences needed repair, and the land always demanded attention. But the challenges no longer felt overwhelming. With Luke by her side, she felt capable and confident. She had learned to face difficulties calmly, to take things one step at a time, and to find joy in small successes. One afternoon, as they worked in the garden, Luke paused and looked at her. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I want to ask you something. You don't have to answer right away, but I need you to hear it." Sarah looked at him curiously, sensing the seriousness in his tone. "I know the past you've carried has been heavy," he continued, "and I know trust doesn't come easily. But I want you to know, you don't have to face life alone anymore. If you're ready, if you want, I'd like you to stay here, with me. Not because you have to, but because you choose to." Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. She had been hesitant to consider attachment, fearing loss or disappointment. But looking at Luke, seeing his sincerity, his quiet patience, and the way he had stood by her through fear and uncertainty, she felt something shift inside. This was not about dependency. It was about choosing safety, companionship, and hope.
She began, her voice trembling slightly. "I think I'd like that. I want that."
Luke's face softened, a gentle smile spreading across his features. "Then stay with me," he said simply, his voice filled with quiet reassurance. That evening, as the sun set and the ranch was bathed in the golden light of dusk, Sarah realized how much her life had changed. She had arrived months ago, cold, scared, and with nowhere to go. Now she had a home, a purpose, and a person she could trust completely. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had led her to this moment, a moment of safety, hope, and new beginnings. The following weeks were filled with routine, laughter, and quiet reflection. Sarah continued to learn about ranch life, caring for the animals, tending the garden, and repairing fences. Each task brought a sense of accomplishment, a reminder that she was capable of more than she had believed. And with each passing day, her bond with Luke grew stronger, not just as companions, but as partners in life, trust, and shared dreams. One morning, as they sat on the porch drinking coffee, Sarah watched the sunrise and felt a sense of gratitude wash over her. The hardships she had endured, the fear, and the loneliness, all of it had led her to this place. She had found someone who believed in her, a safe haven, and the courage to face life without constant fear.
"Luke," she said softly, "thank you."
For everything, for being patient, kind, and for helping me believe in myself again. Luke reached out and gently squeezed her hand. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "You've done the hard part yourself. I've just been here to support you. You've earned every bit of peace and happiness that comes your way." Sarah smiled, feeling a deep sense of contentment. She knew that life would continue to have challenges, that the past might occasionally cast its shadow, but she no longer feared it. She had learned to face the world with courage, to trust those who cared for her, and to embrace the possibility of happiness without guilt or fear. In the weeks that followed, they continued to work side by side, share quiet moments by the fire, and enjoy the simple pleasures of ranch life. Sarah began to plan small projects, planting flowers along the porch, organizing a small library of books, and even helping Luke repair an old shed that had long been neglected. Each project was a symbol of her growth, her confidence, and her willingness to invest in a future she had once thought impossible. One evening, after a long day of work, they sat outside watching the stars emerge in the clear night sky. The air was filled with the gentle sounds of crickets and the distant rustle of animals settling for the night. Sarah leaned back, feeling the steady presence of Luke beside her. "You know," she said quietly, "I never imagined I could feel this happy. I thought life would always be about running, surviving, and fearing what comes next. But now I feel like I can finally live." Luke smiled, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "That's what life is meant for," he said. "To face challenges, yes, but also to find peace, joy, and connection." "And you found all of that here." Sarah rested her head on his shoulder, feeling a sense of belonging she had never known. She had arrived at the ranch with nothing but fear and uncertainty, but now she had a home, trust, and the courage to embrace life fully. As the night deepened and the stars shone brightly above, Sarah realized that she had found something more than safety. She had found hope, love, and the understanding that life could be kind again. And in that moment, with Luke beside her and the ranch peaceful around them, she allowed herself to dream of a future filled with possibility, resilience, and quiet happiness. For the first time in years, Sarah felt truly free. She had nowhere to go before, but now she had everywhere she wanted to be, right here, on the ranch, with Luke, and with a heart open to life once more. And when Luke quietly said, as he had months ago, "Stay with me," Sarah smiled, knowing that this time it was a choice filled with trust, hope, and love. She stayed not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she had finally found a place where she belonged.